Between 1910 and 1970, a quiet but devastating tragedy unfolded across Australia. Over 100,000 Indigenous children, babies, toddlers, young boys and girls, were forcibly taken from their families by government authorities and church missions. They were stripped from their homes, their languages, their culture, and in many cases never returned. They are called the stolen generations. But why did this happen? Who allowed it? What was the logic or cruelty behind it? And what scars have those stolen children and their descendants carried for decades? This is a story not just of bureaucratic racism or misguided policy. It is a story of deliberate cultural theft, a story of a nation that attempted to erase a people. But it is also a story of survival, of voices that refused to be silenced, and of healing that continues to this day. Auntie Mary Tillmonth, a Rarita elder, said, "They came on a Tuesday morning. I was 6, took my sister, said it was for school. We never saw her again." To understand the pain of the stolen generations, we must look back over a century into policies dressed in the language of protection but rooted in control and assimilation. We must listen to the voices who remember not as history, but as lived trauma. These removals weren't accidental. They were systematic, legislated, managed by governments, funded by taxpayers. It was a form of cultural genocide. Children placed in institutions or adopted by white families, forced to reject their heritage, punished for speaking their language, and made to feel that being Aboriginal was something to be ashamed of. The psychological scars? Still raw. The damage to families? Incalculable. Today, as Australia grapples with truth-telling and reconciliation, we must ask, is an apology enough?
We apologise for the laws and policies of successive parliaments and governments that have inflicted profound grief, suffering and loss on these our fellow Australians.
What does justice look like for a people who were broken, scattered, and too often forgotten? This episode explores what was taken and what is still being fought for. In the early 20th century, Australia's leaders crafted a chilling solution to what they called the Aboriginal problem. Rather than support or uplift Indigenous communities, they sought to erase them, not through violence alone, but through what they believed was benevolent assimilation. It began with legislation. The Aborigines Act of 1905, passed in Western Australia, gave state authorities sweeping powers over every aspect of Indigenous life, where Aboriginal people could live, work, marry, and, most devastatingly, whether they could raise their children. Under these laws, so-called half-caste children, those with mixed Indigenous and European ancestry, were labeled as candidates for removal. The government believed they could be trained, educated, and absorbed into white society. It was a eugenics-based plan to breed out Aboriginality over generations. They said it was for our protection, but all it did was destroy families. Dr. Luitia O'Donoghue, Aboriginal rights advocate. You have to understand, this wasn't hidden. It was the law. It was public. Entire towns knew what was happening, and most stayed silent. Professor Marcia Langton, Indigenous historian. These weren't isolated incidents. They were deliberate, systemic removals carried out across every state and territory. In remote missions like Moore River Settlement, Cootamundra Girls' Home, and Kinchela Boys' Home, Aboriginal children were cut off from their families and languages. They were taught to clean, cook, and labor, not to thrive, but to serve. They were raised to believe they were unwanted by their own people. In truth, many were loved, but powerless parents were criminalized if they resisted. The system offered them no choice. The 1937 Native Welfare Conference made it explicit. The goal was full absorption of half-castes into white society. As one senior official chillingly wrote in 1938, the destiny of the natives of Aboriginal origin, but not of the full blood, lies in their ultimate absorption into the white community. This was cultural erasure disguised as care. A methodical destruction of lineage, language, and land connection masked in the language of progress. By 1970, when removals officially ended, over 1 in every 10 Aboriginal children had been taken. Entire generations had grown up institutionalized, taught to forget their heritage, shamed into silence, and made wards of a government that saw them as a problem to fix, not people to honor. Some never returned. Some died in those missions. Some grew up believing their parents abandoned them, a lie that tore through their sense of identity. And while the policy may have ended on paper, its effects echo today. Trauma passed through bloodlines, gaps in education, income, incarceration, communities still fractured. The policy of assimilation didn't just try to erase culture, it tried to erase existence. They erased our names, our languages, our family ties, but they couldn't erase our memory. Uncle Larry McDermott, elder and cultural advocate. To truly understand the impact of the stolen generations, we must step beyond the policy and into the lives of the children being taken, those left behind, and the communities forever fractured. Once removed, Indigenous children were placed in government institutions, church-run missions, or adopted into white families, often with new names, new identities, and no way back home. In these institutions, care was a myth, abuse was common, isolation was certain. Children were often told their parents were dead. In many cases, that wasn't true. It was a lie told to sever hope. Uncle Archie Roach, a stolen generations survivor, was taken at age 3. He only discovered his family decades later. His haunting song, "Took the Children Away," became an anthem for a stolen people. Another survivor, Doris Pilkington, wrote "Follow the Rabbit-Proof Fence," a retelling of her mother Molly's 1,600-kilometer escape from a mission to return home. The story became a global film, capturing just a fraction of the pain carried by thousands. "I was told my mother was dead. I found her 40 years later," Uncle Archie Roach, musician and survivor, said. "They broke something in me, and in my children. I don't know if it'll ever be fixed." Auntie Lorraine Peters, Camilla Roy Elda. "All I had was a number. That was my name. Number 22, Paul Coe, former Kinchela resident. The psychological toll remains immeasurable. Survivors report higher rates of PTSD, depression, substance abuse, and suicide. But the trauma didn't end with them. A 2020 Australian study showed that children of the stolen generations are twice as likely to experience incarceration and 3 times as likely to live with mental health struggles. The cycle of pain has become generational. And yet, even in the shadows, there is strength. Many survivors have turned their pain into activism. In 1997, the Bringing Them Home report compiled over 500 testimonies, laying bare the system's cruelty. It was the first time the nation heard, formally, what had been done. It sparked a national reckoning, and from that reckoning, the seeds of reconciliation began to grow. Truth heals, silence kills. We told the truth so our children wouldn't have to carry it alone. Sir Ronald Wilson, Bringing Them Home Commissioner. They took the children to make them forget who they were. But across generations, in stories, songs, and survival, Indigenous families remembered. They remembered the names, the lands, the songs, and in remembering, they reclaimed what the system tried to erase. By the late 20th century, the silence surrounding the stolen generations began to break. Survivors were speaking. The country was listening, if uneasily. But how does a nation begin to reconcile with a century of cultural theft? The answer begins with truth. In 1997, the Bringing Them Home report was released. Over 500 testimonies, hundreds of pages detailing trauma, abuse, and cultural destruction. For many Australians, it was the first time they heard the full truth, not from politicians or textbooks, but from survivors. This report gave me my voice back. I wasn't just a number anymore, said Cyril Carmody, Stolen Generations survivor. 1 year later, Australians across the country walked the streets in mourning. Sorry Day, May 26, 1998, marked the beginning of acknowledgement. But acknowledgement is not the same as justice. The apology helped, but where's the funding? Where's the land back? Pat Anderson, co-chair, Bringing Them Home report. Prime Minister Kevin Rudd's apology was historic. A nation turned toward the truth at last. Over 1.3 million Australians watched live. For many survivors, it was the first public recognition that what happened to them was real and wrong. In the years since, healing has taken many forms, not all from the government. Communities have begun cultural revival programs, teaching lost languages, hosting storytelling circles, healing through art, music, and tradition. These are not just acts of resilience, they're acts of resistance. Our kids are learning our language again. That's Hope. By Thomas Mayer, Torres Strait Islander leader. But not all wounds are healing. The 2023 Voice to Parliament referendum failed, a bitter blow to many seeking a permanent constitutional voice for First Nations peoples. Some saw it as a rejection of reconciliation, others called it a wake-up call. We've apologized, now we must act. Land, reparations, education. That's real justice. Professor Megan Davis, Referendum Council. Reconciliation is more than words. It's land back, it's truth-telling, it's building systems that honor the people who were once erased. Despite the scars, cultural revival is rising. The stolen generation's legacy is still a wound, but every truth spoken, every child taught their real name, every return to country, that is healing. Not just for Indigenous Australians, for the soul of the nation itself. From 1910 to 1970, Australia stole over 100,000 Indigenous children. Not for love, not for safety, but to erase identity, to silence culture, to mold them into someone else's image. These weren't just policies, they were personal devastations, repeated 100,000 times. Every missing child was someone's sibling, someone's songline, someone's dreaming severed. The past cannot be undone, but the future? It still holds a question. What will we do with the truth? We're still here, still fighting. That's our strength. Auntie Mary Tilmuth, a Rurnt elder. Healing is not a finish line, it's a journey. It's passing language from elder to child. It's standing up even when history tried to erase you. It's knowing that survival is not just endurance. It's a form of resistance. The world must learn, never steal a people's heart. Dr. Jackie Huggins, Indigenous historian. This was not just Australia's past, it's its unfinished story. Let us write the next chapter together.